Well, the big banks may have been under a lot of scrutiny since the Royal Commission, but auditors may well be next in focus. A parliamentary inquiry into regulation of auditing in Australia is underway. And on Friday, former ACCC boss Professor Fels presented to a joint committee on what he thinks of the profession, and he didn't hold back. Professor Fels, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, I want to talk about your submission in a moment, but I just wanted to get your initial reaction to the Westpac and AUSTRAC case.
Well, there are still many questions to be answered about it. I don't quite know why it went on for so long. Incidentally, the regulator appears to have done a good job, but I also wondered perhaps why they hadn't acted earlier. I also wonder if there are any audit questions whether auditors should have picked it up or whether the internal compliance system of the bank was at fault.
Yes, on that question of auditors, there are some questions now being asked of the auditors in and around Westpac and associated businesses. I'm interested in the context of your submission. How do you think something like this could be prevented or at least picked up earlier with changes in the rules to auditing?
I think there's a better chance of these things being picked up if we separate auditors from doing consulting from auditors doing straight audit. There tends to be a conflict of interest. If an auditor is being paid by a firm for consulting it does while it's auditing, it could inhibit its own audit process, the integrity of it, because they'll be worried about losing consulting business. There's an inherent seeming conflict of interest.
So what are your key recommendations around the reform of auditing rules in Australia?
My key recommendation is that there should be legislation to prevent auditors from doing consulting at all. That is the key recommendation, full separation, because auditing is a really important part of our market economy. Shareholders, consumers, governments, community, everyone relies upon proper auditing to protect the integrity of the whole economic system. It's really important, and it shouldn't be subject to conflicts of interest that could cause it to go wrong.
Now, of course, consulting is is a huge part of the business of the big four consulting firms today. Do you think there should be a structural separation entirely from consulting of the big four firms? Should they even be allowed to conduct this type of business, in your opinion?
I'm inclined to go for a clean solution. I'm sure that in the real world of markets and commerce, things will sort themselves out if that law is passed, and you'll get new entities capable of doing auditing on their own and or other entities doing consulting. I'm not very keen on halfway house measures. For example, some people say, well, we should prohibit auditors from doing any consulting in relation to firms they are auditing, but not in relation to other businesses. To my mind, that's a messy solution. For example, suppose that the auditor is auditing firm A and consulting for firm B, where firm B is a competitor of firm A. Then won't they use knowledge they've acquired from auditing in their advice? Isn't there a risk they would use that in their advice to firm B? And possibly also firm B information might have an effect on their auditing. So there just seems to be a conflict there, and halfway measures are also very messy. There have been some moves toward it. We're starting to already have very complicated laws just calling for little bits of separation. I think it's one of those areas where you're not going to regulate your way out of a conflict of interest. Just clean out the conflict of interest totally.
All right, but there are a lot of other institutions, law firms, banks that have advice arms, for instance, that they say, well, Chinese walls do operate within these organisations. Are you simply saying that ultimately these organisations can't be trusted not to have those conflicts of interest?
That's the big lesson of the Hayne inquiry. The whole financial sector, I'll include auditing in it if you like, have totally failed to manage conflicts of interest, and you need much cleaner structures, particularly in really important things like auditing. What has also happened is that the culture of these firms has been overtaken by a money-making, profit-seeking culture where rewards to individuals through bonuses, incentives and so on have tended to cause them to make bad decisions by putting their remuneration ahead of the interests of users of their products.
How much of a problem is the dominance of the Big Four? Is this more of a competition issue, do you think?
Well, I grant you it is a problem coming up with this recommendation when there's a Big Four. It is true there is a competition issue about the Big Four, but there's not that much can be done about it through the ACCC. I noticed that in the UK they have recommended taking steps that would positively build up other auditors so that you have more than the Big Four.
All right, Professor Alan Fels, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Leo.